Hey everybody, it's What's Up Mike, and today we're talking about the great sporting shutdown. In March, last month, basically every major professional sports league began a shutdown process or a season suspension process that began with the NBA on the 12th of March, and we're going to see what that looks like, but it doesn't include everybody. The best sport is still live, so let's talk about that. So, one of the major effects of the pandemic is that public events that involve large crowds are just an unacceptable, they're an unacceptable measure or kind of event given the transmission rates of this virus. So, obviously, the shutdown of those kinds of events is necessary and began very quickly once the implications started to become more widespread, especially with the positive tests from some NBA players kind of starting this trickle down. So really the sporting shutdown. So let's go through some dates and then we'll talk about how it started, what some of the implications and reschedulings look like for sports, and then who's still putting on events, which is wild. So the first event period of any, like not just league, but event, the first event was canceled on March 8th, and that was the BNP Paribas. Is that how you say that? Paribas? Let's go on a tangent and figure out how I can not sound like an idiot. Paribas? BNP. It's French. Paribas. I don't know. Anyway, tennis event. The BNP Open tennis tournament was scheduled to begin on March 9th, and on March 8th it was canceled. So it was scheduled to begin the next day in Indian Wells, California, and then it was canceled, it was canceled after a case of the coronavirus was confirmed nearby in the Coachella Valley in Southern California. Obviously, Coachella is the problem here, but no. So the case was confirmed nearby in Southern California, and they canceled that tennis tournament after that case was confirmed. So that was the day before the tournament was going to happen. It was going to happen on March 9th. It was canceled on March 8th. That was the first kind of domino to fall in sporting event and league cancellations. So after that, what was that Wednesday of that week? That Wednesday was the 11th of March. So on the 11th of March, the evening, Utah Jazz All-Star center Rudy Gobert tested positive for coronavirus. And so the game that he was scheduled to play in next was postponed, right? So the Utah Jazz or the NBA, I'm not exactly sure who postponed that game. I think it was the Utah Jazz in conversation with the NBA. They postponed that game, but then very quickly the next day on March 12th, the NBA suspended its season. Now, there's a bunch of reasons possibly for that. The NBA has a very large interest in China, or I guess more accurately, China and the Chinese people have a very large interest in the NBA. The NBA is, I think, the most popular American sporting league in the country of China. A couple of months ago when there were massive protests in Hong Kong, which I'm curious how that's all going to kind of work out. Or I haven't even looked at what the Hong Kong protests look like. We should do an episode on why they were protesting in Hong Kong and kind of what the long-term governmental implications of the Hong Kong-China relationship are. That's a really interesting international affairs, international security policy topic, but it's not what we're talking about today. But was it back in October? Maybe. One of it was the Houston Rockets. Yeah, so the Houston Rockets GM tweeted on October 4th, 2019, that what is this tweet? I got it pulled up. Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong. So the reaction to that was a massive trickle-down effect where basically everybody said, "I'm sorry, China, we didn't mean that," and Daryl Morey, the GM of the Houston Rockets, is very sorry. I think he publicly apologized for this. The Rockets owner tweeted that the GM does not speak for the Houston Rockets with a capital N-O-T. So I get this story specifically is from The Atlantic. And so what they said is basically right after that tweet, when the GM and the Rockets tweeted about his support for the Hong Kong people in protests, nearly every Chinese entity that's involved with basketball suspended its ties to the Rockets. That's a huge deal. The Chinese Basketball Association is their national television network that shows all these basketball games, NBA games, and they hold all of the exclusive rights to stream those NBA games in the country, and they have massive sponsors associated with that network. It's $1.5 billion rights to stream those games. Massive money. And I believe the Chinese Basketball Association said they would not be showing Houston Rockets games after that. The NBA responded before the end of that weekend, and they had a statement of contrition, an apology, basically. Yeah, so it's a big deal. Like, basketball in China is huge. There are more. Oh, this is a great stat. There are more Chinese people who play recreational basketball than the populations of all but 3 of the world's countries. 300 million people in China play recreational basketball. That's like right around the population of the United States and America. The United States and America? Anyway, there's a huge business. It's a $4 billion business in China annually. Massive fanship, massive streaming rights associated with the Chinese Basketball Association television channel. Jesus, my words right now. So, more coffee. So all of that background was just for the purpose of explaining why maybe the NBA was first in this, right? So they have massive ties to China. More NBA representatives, employees, players, team representatives, and employees go to China physically as a result of that relationship and travel there. So that's maybe a factor. But just being plugged into the Chinese market, the NBA is likely going to be more sensitive to things coming out of China, including viruses. So the NBA suspends the season on March 12th, which was a massive news story. And it just started a huge trickle down from there. So the rest came after that. Major League Baseball on March 12th suspended spring training games and then delayed the start of the season by 2 weeks. The NHL on March 12th paused the season. NASCAR, so my company is a NASCAR sponsor for a truck series team, and we were planning on going to our first race that weekend as part of that sponsorship. So the race was on Saturday, March 14th. When all of this was happening, we were prepping for a trip to Atlanta Motor Speedway for a truck series race to support our team that we sponsor, and we had to cancel that. They initially said 2 races will be without fans. Well, we technically had team tickets, so we could have still gone. Now, if they suspended fans, we obviously we're not going to go. We're not essential to the team actually being able to do the race. So we as soon as they suspended fans, we canceled our plans to attend that race at Atlanta Motor Speedway on the 14th. But then on March 13th, on that Friday, they suspended all races. NASCAR did. So, yeah. The PGA on March 12th said it would continue with no fans present, but the following day on the 13th, they suspended all events. So you see this massive trickle down, but it all happened in 2 days. So the great sporting shutdown in the United States and really worldwide happened in a very short period of time. So the reaction was quick, which was kind of typical, but it was also the right answer, I think. So the Masters, I grew up in Augusta, Georgia. The Masters is, I would argue, the most unique golf tournament in the world because it's the same tournament, and the tournament itself and the location are tied, which isn't really the case. It's not the case with any other major tournament. There's only 4 majors: U.S. Open, British Open, Masters, and PGA Championship. And the other 3, other than the Masters, rotate their course that they play at every year. The Masters is at the Augusta National every year. So it's totally unique among golf tournaments in that it's a major and the course and the tournament itself are tied. So they kind of act independently of the PGA in some ways. And their decision-making ability in many ways comes from the fact that they essentially just have an infinite cash. One of my good friends is a accounting manager, supervisor. He's in leadership in the accounting division at the Augusta National Golf Course / the Masters tournament. And I can't get shit out of this guy. He won't tell me basically anything about their I mean, he's obviously under these non-disclosure agreements and non-competes and all this kind of stuff with the Augusta National. I try and get him to break these all the time because I'm curious. I was even trying to get him to set up some kind of back alley relationship after they postponed the Masters, which I'll get into in a second. So the Masters announced it'd be postponing its April 9th to 12th tournament on March 13th, right? So that was that Friday. And immediately I was in this dude's texts saying, hey man, how can we set something up? I'm trying to be this reseller for all this merch. It's not going to get sold. I got nothing. He laughed at me, of course. I can't get anything out of this dude. Rob, give me more information. It's entertaining and I want it. But he's tight-lipped, as he probably should be. So the Masters said they were going to postpone. And then just recently, on April 6th, they announced dates for the Masters in November, which is totally unique. The Masters has never been held in a postponed fashion like that. And so it's going to be interesting with the Masters and their accounting, their revenues, because they're going to have unique merch now that's associated with this fall season tournament. And there may never be in our lifetimes a Masters golf tournament in the fall again. So it's an interesting, unique situation that they've created with the tournament now, where they're going to be able to provide something they haven't before and actually maybe increases their potential for sales, which with the Augusta National and Masters is just insane. So it's interesting subject for them and how they're kind of reacting to that. The NCAA announced no March Madness with no fans on the 11th, and then canceled the events outright on the 12th. And that's a $1 billion revenue stream for them annually, the NCAA basketball tournament in March. And that's just gone in one chop. Individual NCAA conferences canceled their tournaments on March 12th as well. And then the Association of Tennis Professionals suspended tournaments for 6 weeks on March 12th. And Major League Soccer waited all the way until March 19th, but then suspended all games. So interestingly, some things happened right before the suspension of games that may mean that a lot of those professional sports organizations probably cut things off a little bit too late, right? So in Seattle on March 7th, just before all of this, the area that was, this is the area that was the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, right? Like it was at one of those senior centers. They had a high mortality rate at the outbreak location in the Seattle area. And the professional soccer team for Seattle is called the Seattle Sounders. They have a huge fan base. I think they're probably the MLS team. Atlanta's got a big fan base too. They're newer though. The Seattle Sounders has a major fan base and big support. They played a game with 33,000 fans present at the CenturyLink Field in Seattle. And on March 5th, 2 days before that game, there were 51 reported cases of coronavirus and 10 deaths in the area from that epicenter. So 2 days before the game, there was an outbreak, cleared data, already had 10 deaths reported, and the game happened. And somebody, this is great from this one story. Where did I get that story so I can give them some credit? Yowza. Did I get this from the World Socialist website? Maybe not the best source. Anyway, no, this is from a different place. The Atlantic. which is a much better source in my book. The Atlantic's actually had great reporting on this, and seemingly as little bias or as neutral a bias as you can hope for. So anyway, an employee who worked as a vendor at the game for the Seattle Dragons football team against the Dallas Renegades. Is this like XFL or something like that? Anyway, they had employees at those games working, at least one, in the end of February who'd already tested positive for the coronavirus, or who tested positive maybe right after that for the coronavirus. So there are these examples of individuals where they're trying to track contact and track transmission source of this, where they found individuals who were participating in major sporting events as vendors, attendees, whatever, who then very quickly afterwards tested positive, which is unfortunate, obviously, for controlling the spread. And then an NHL hockey game was played the Thursday before all of this shutdown week. So that was on the 5th of March in San Jose, California, under kind of similar circumstances. Just hours after that game, public health officials in the area in San Jose recommended that large gatherings like sporting events be canceled. And what is it? So let me clarify this. Oh, so the game happened after the San Jose, California public health officials recommended these sporting events be canceled. Interesting. And there were 20 cases in the area at the time. The San Jose Sharks played their game against the Minnesota Wild with 14,500 fans in attendance, which is 2,000 below their season average. So it was a low attendance game. 14,500 people with positive cases in the area, though. So, and on Sunday, March 8th, the NBA had 10 games where 180,000 fans attended, and they were all in indoor arenas. So, that there were definitely exposure risks in that, but it's one of those things where, we're looking back. So you can't dig into them too much for their decision making, or maybe I just don't have the material in front of me to criticize decision making. I just find it interesting that the trickle down of all of these sports events and leagues happened essentially in a 48-hour period, from nothing canceled, no full league cancellations, to nearly everything canceled. But there is a holdout, ladies and gentlemen. There is one major international sports league that is continuing to put on events and finding creative solutions, and it is controversial. It happens to be the best sports league in the world, the UFC. Mixed martial arts is my sport of choice when it comes to fanship and adult athletic lifetime sport kind of endeavors, the hobbies, the sporting and fitness hobbies you've got for the rest of your life that you can do forever. Jiu-jitsu is my shit. Anybody that knows me knows that I have we'll call it a dedication, a practice, maybe an obsession with jiu-jitsu. I think that Brazilian jiu-jitsu, when practiced by almost anyone, makes you a better person, and you're better for it. The people around you are better for it. There's a lot that goes into that. I'm sure I can do 100 episodes on just my thoughts about jiu-jitsu, but mixed martial arts is not canceled for the UFC. So the way it's interesting how they're planning to put these events on. The fight that was scheduled was between two fighters, Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's a Dagestani Russian wrestler, and Tony Ferguson is a striker, jiu-jitsu, grappling athlete from the United States. This is arguably the most anticipated and biggest fight matchup in mixed martial arts history between two people who are seemingly unbeatable in the same division for the belt. Big fight, multiple millions of possible pay-per-view buys, which is huge. It has the potential, we'll get there, of being the largest pay-per-view event in history. Boxing, mixed martial arts, whatever, pay-per-view, it had the potential to be the biggest in history. This was the fifth time that Tony Ferguson and Khabib were meant to fight. So let's see if we can run down the list of why these fights were canceled. So anyway, this fight's scheduled. It's not happening. The reason why it's not happening is not because the event's not going to happen, but because Khabib Nurmagomedov is stuck in Russia. He's under a travel ban, and he's actually like, there are real legal risks for Russians breaking their required protocols right now, and so that's a factor. It's a much higher legal risk for him than an American fighter in this situation. Goodness gracious with these notifications. I apologize. So that's a big risk for him. He just can't leave Russia. Even with a private flight option, there's not an option for him to leave Russia. So, but Tony's still down to fight. So they've rescheduled and rebuilt this fight card, and they rescheduled the venue. It's no longer happening Madison Square Garden. Wait, was it happening in Madison Square Garden? Or no, it was happening in Vegas, I think. Anyway, it's no longer happening in Vegas. It's going to happen at an undisclosed Indian reservation somewhere on the West Coast. This is pretty amazing. So talk about almost like this renegade president of a sports organization. Can you imagine the NFL putting on a game with no fans at an undisclosed location to prevent protesters from being involved? And managing the testing and preparation and safety around putting on an event during a pandemic. It's wild that this is happening. Dana White's the man. Controversial opinion, maybe. So the reasons. So these are we'll go down this, and now we're getting into the weeds on the UFC a little bit. So if you're not a big fan of mixed martial arts, maybe you should be. So they were first supposed to fight Tony and Khabib on December 11th, 2015. 3 months before the fight was scheduled, Nurmagomedov pulled out due to a rib injury. Got it. Fight was rescheduled April 16th, 2016. After Ferguson beat Barboza, they wanted to rebook the fight. 11 days before the event was supposed to take place, Ferguson was forced to pull out due to blood and fluid in his lungs. And he was quoted as saying, "I can usually power through these things." What an animal. Couldn't fight. That shows you how hard mixed martial arts training is preparing for a fight. Blood and fluid in his lungs. Rescheduled for the third time at UFC 209, March 4th, 2017. Crazy. Third time. Just over 24 hours away from the event, Nurmagomedov dropped out of the event because he was in the middle of a weight cut and his organs started to shut down. He suffered organ failure because of the weight cut getting ready for this fight. UFC 223, April 7th, 2018, the fourth attempt at this fight. And then Tony Ferguson had a massive, massive tear in his knee. What was this? What is the actual? He tripped over a wire at a television studio a few days before and brutally tore his LCL, detached it from the bone. And then now UFC 249, April 18th, 2020. And Nurmagomedov can't make the fight. So needless to say, it's a major issue for fight fans. I feel like the fight's cursed like everyone else. But we have a stand-in. Justin Gaethje is going to stand in for Nurmagomedov. Gaethje versus Ferguson is a massive fight, the biggest fight of the year so far for sure. Other fights on the card, it's a huge card. I can't get into any more details or I'll scare away everybody who doesn't go as deep on MMA as I do. But Dana White's still putting on the event. He's also said he's going to begin putting on weekly fight events after that, weekly professional sporting events. And there's talk of acquiring or securing or renting or whatever, and a private island and setting up a venue to be able to put these fights on with no fans, obviously. And they're going to test everyone who attends, cameramen, corners, medical personnel, the judges, the referees, the fighters themselves, the announcers, everybody that's there the technical support crew, everybody that's going to be there. They're going to tactically position people to keep as much appropriate space. They're going to test everyone beforehand, try and make it safe. Fighters, they're going to give fighters some leeway if they pull out of fights because of this. And so they're not forcing anyone to fight. They're not threatening jobs, threatening contracts if people don't fight, but they're allowing fighters to take fights and they're scheduling fights. It's crazy. It's the only professional sporting event that's still doing anything. So it is an unprecedented time in sports. And this is something that many, the majority, I would say, of individual Americans feel this because this is a major source of entertainment in the country. So, yeah, unprecedented times, and one major sporting league is still putting on events and finding ways to get it done. They obviously see some factors there are factors in UFC events that maybe make it easier for them to put these events on. It's much more difficult, and there's just more people involved to have an NFL game. I would think there's more people involved to have an NBA game, even though they're held in equivalent size arenas, which you kind of think if they're in a similar type of arena, there's probably similar television coverage and technical requirements for production, but I'm not in that world, so I can't say with any definitive evidence that that's the case. But the UFC goes on. We will get our fights on April 18th next weekend. I can't wait. I'll be getting the pay-per-view. You should get the pay-per-view. Get on ESPN Plus. Become a fan of the only sport that's out there. So, yeah. The great sporting shutdown in America. Save one. The man, Dana White, putting on events, taking some professional risk, but he's a maverick. He always has been. The UFC is going to do what they're going to do, and I'm going to watch. Thanks for hanging out.